They're right behind us! Move! Don't stop, keep running! Besser! Vorwärts! Schneller! Los, los, los! Dort!
August 17th, 1944. A German security detachment guards a supply depot 40 kilometers behind the front line. Feldwebel Schmidt watches the road west, the direction all threats are supposed to come from. His men are eating lunch. No combat sounds, no aircraft, just another quiet day in the rear. Then a soldier shouts, "Tanks on the eastern road." Schmidt turns, confused. East is Germany. East is safety. Then he sees them. American Shermans, already in the compound. His men scatter. Some grab rifles. Most just run. Within 3 minutes, the depot is lost. Schmidt hides in a cellar, trembling, trying to understand what happened. The Americans didn't break through. They were already behind him, and nobody warned him. Nobody knew what German rear guards said when Patton's army appeared behind them.
Stehen bleiben! Feuer nicht! Vorwärts geht's!
And panic spread hook. August 17th, 1944. A German security detachment guards a supply depot 40 kilometers behind the front line. Feldwebel Schmidt watches the road west, the direction all threats are supposed to come from. His men are eating lunch. No combat sounds, no aircraft, just another quiet day in the rear. Then a soldier shouts, "Tanks on the eastern road." Schmidt turns, confused. East is Germany. East is safety. Then he sees them. American Shermans, already in the compound. His men scatter. Some grab rifles. Most just run. Within 3 minutes, the depot is lost. Schmidt hides in a cellar, trembling, trying to understand what happened. The Americans didn't break through. They were already behind him, and nobody warned him. Nobody knew. Chapter 1. The Safe Zone. Oberfeldwebel Franz Richter commanded a security platoon stationed in the town of Montargis, 70 kilometers southeast of Paris. His unit's mission was simple: maintain order in the rear area, guard supply routes, prevent sabotage by resistance fighters. Combat troops fought at the front. Richter's men performed unglamorous but necessary security duties in zones designated as safe. On August 14th, 1944, Richter's daily routine continued normally. Morning inspection, patrol assignments, checkpoint duty. His men were mostly older soldiers, men in their 30s and 40s who weren't fit for frontline service. Some had been wounded and returned to limited duty. Others had medical conditions that kept them off the line. They were adequate for security work, but not trained or equipped for serious combat. The tactical situation briefings Richter received indicated stable front lines approximately 50 kilometers to the west. American forces were advancing but slowly, contained by organized German resistance. His security zone was well behind this front, safely distant from any combat. The biggest threats his unit faced were French resistance attacks, black market activity, and maintaining discipline among rear area troops who had too much idle time. Richter's men guarded a fuel depot on the edge of town. Thousands of liters of gasoline stored in drums, intended for panzer units operating at the front. Standard security procedures, sentries at the gates, roving patrols, all very routine. The depot had been operating for weeks without incident. Convoys arrived regularly to collect fuel. Paperwork was processed. Everything functioned as designed. On the morning of August 16th, a scheduled fuel convoy failed to arrive. Richter noted this in his log, but wasn't concerned. Convoys were often delayed for various reasons: road conditions, mechanical problems, changed priorities. He would investigate if the convoy didn't appear by evening. By afternoon, a second convoy that should have arrived also failed to show. Richter attempted to contact the transportation unit responsible for the convoys. The telephone lines were dead. Richter sent a runner to the nearest German headquarters, a supply command located 8 kilometers away. The runner returned hours later with disturbing news. That headquarters had been evacuated. Buildings were empty. No indication of where the staff had gone or why they left. Richter felt the first stirring of real concern. Headquarters didn't simply abandon positions without orders or explanation. Something was wrong. He attempted to contact his own higher command by radio. The radio operator reported that their assigned frequencies were silent. No routine traffic. No scheduled communications checks. Just static. Richter ordered his platoon to combat readiness. Men were recalled from town. Weapons were issued. Ammunition distributed. He still didn't know what threat they faced, but every instinct told him the situation had changed fundamentally. That evening, refugees began flowing through Montargis from the west, French civilians fleeing combat. They spoke of American tanks advancing rapidly, of German positions being overrun or bypassed. Richter questioned several refugees carefully. Their accounts were confused and contradictory, but consistent theme emerged. American forces were moving east much faster than anyone expected, and German defensive lines were dissolving. Richter faced difficult decision. His orders were to guard the fuel depot. He had received no instructions to evacuate or withdraw. Military discipline demanded he maintain his position until properly relieved or given new orders, but the refugees' accounts suggested American forces could arrive at any time. If he stayed and was overrun, his entire platoon would be killed or captured, and the fuel would fall into enemy hands intact. If he withdrew without orders, he would be abandoning his post and could face court-martial. He decided to compromise. He would destroy the fuel depot to prevent its capture, then withdraw his platoon east toward what he hoped were still German-held positions. His men worked through the night, puncturing fuel drums and spreading gasoline throughout the storage area. At dawn on August 17th, they set the depot ablaze and began marching east, joining streams of other German rear area troops who had reached the same conclusion independently. The safe zone had ceased to exist, and nobody had told them until it was too late. Lieutenant Paul Becker commanded a supply convoy of 12 trucks carrying ammunition from a depot at Auxerre toward forward units near the front. The convoy departed on the morning of August 16th, following a route that had been used successfully for weeks. Becker had made this run dozens of times. He knew every turn, every village, every checkpoint along the way. It was boring, routine work, exactly the kind of assignment you wanted in the final year of a war going badly. The first checkpoint, 20 kilometers from Auxerre, was unmanned. Becker found this odd but not alarming. Perhaps the guards were on patrol or responding to some local incident. He ordered the convoy to continue. The second checkpoint, another 15 kilometers along, was also abandoned. Now Becker felt genuine concern. 2 unmanned checkpoints suggested systematic problem rather than coincidence. He stopped the convoy and consulted his map. According to his route orders, they were still well behind German lines. The front was supposed to be at least 40 kilometers ahead of their current position. Nothing in his briefing suggested any danger to supply convoys in this area. Yet the abandoned checkpoints implied German forces had withdrawn without informing rear area units. Becker made the decision to continue forward cautiously, sending a single truck ahead as scout while the main convoy followed at distance. The scout truck returned within 30 minutes. The driver reported seeing American tanks on the road ahead, moving east. Not a patrol, a column. The Americans were between Becker's convoy and its destination, operating freely on roads that were supposed to be German-controlled. Becker ordered the convoy to halt while he assessed options. He couldn't continue forward because Americans blocked the route. He couldn't remain stationary because the area wasn't secure. His only viable option was turning around and retreating to Auxerre. Perhaps someone there would know what was happening and could provide updated orders. The convoy began the slow process of turning around on the narrow road. As they maneuvered, American fighter bombers appeared overhead. The aircraft made several passes, strafing the convoy. Becker's men abandoned their trucks and scattered into adjacent fields, seeking any cover they could find. 2 trucks were hit and began burning. The ammunition they carried cooked off, creating secondary explosions that destroyed 2 more vehicles. When the aircraft finally departed, Becker had lost a third of his convoy and several men were wounded. The survivors regrouped and began walking back toward Auxerre, abandoning the remaining trucks and their cargo. They encountered other German units moving east in various states of disorder. Supply troops, administrative personnel, rear area security forces. All had apparently reached the same conclusion. The rear area was no longer safe and they needed to reach German lines, wherever those lines actually were. By evening of August 16th, Becker's group had grown to approximately 60 men from various units, none of whom had clear information about the tactical situation or coherent orders. They were soldiers without a front, rear area personnel suddenly finding themselves in combat zone they hadn't known existed. Some men wanted to surrender. Others insisted they should fight their way east. Becker tried to maintain some semblance of military order and discipline, but his authority as a supply officer carried limited weight in crisis situation. They spent the night in a forest, without food, with minimal ammunition, listening to sounds of tank engines on nearby roads, but unable to determine whether those tanks were German or American. At dawn on August 17th, they resumed moving east, now part of a growing stream of disorganized German troops, all heading in the same direction, all trying to escape American forces that had somehow gotten behind them without anyone noticing until too late. Oberstabsarzt Heinrich Müller commanded a field hospital located in the town of Sens, approximately 80 kilometers southeast of Paris. His facility treated casualties evacuated from the front, providing surgical care and stabilization, before patients were moved further east to hospitals in Germany. The hospital had been operating in Sens for 3 weeks without incident. It was clearly marked with red crosses, located well behind the front lines. Müller considered his position about as safe as anywhere could be in a war zone. On August 15th, the hospital received its normal flow of wounded soldiers, artillery casualties, men injured in combat, some severe cases requiring immediate surgery, others with lighter wounds who would recover quickly. Müller and his medical staff worked efficiently, accustomed to the steady rhythm of war's consequences. The wounded brought news from the front. Fighting was heavy. Americans were advancing, but nothing suggested imminent crisis. The first indication of serious problem came when an ambulance convoy arrived with wounded from a unit that, according to Müller's operational maps, shouldn't have been engaged in combat yet. The unit was supposed to be in reserve position, well behind the active fighting. When Müller questioned the wounded men, they described being attacked by American armor that appeared suddenly from an unexpected direction. The engagement had been brief and devastating. Most of their unit was killed, captured, or scattered. Müller attempted to report this to higher medical command, seeking clarification and updated situation reports. The telephone lines were down. Radio contact couldn't be established. He sent a courier to the nearest German headquarters. The courier returned several hours later reporting that headquarters had already evacuated, leaving no information about where they had gone or what rear area units should do. By evening of August 16th, the stream of wounded arriving at Müller's hospital changed character. These weren't frontline combat casualties. They were rear area security troops, supply soldiers, administrative personnel, all wounded by sudden American attacks in areas that were supposed to be safe. They told stories of convoys ambushed, depots overrun, checkpoints destroyed. The Americans weren't just advancing. They were already in the rear areas. Müller convened his senior staff. The hospital held approximately 180 patients, many of whom couldn't be moved safely. Some were fresh post-operative cases. Others were too severely wounded to survive transportation. The medical staff numbered 43, including doctors, nurses, and orderlies. They had minimal security, just a small detachment of medical troops armed with rifles. The professional and legal obligation was clear. Medical facilities were protected under Geneva Convention. They were required to treat wounded from all sides. They should remain in place, continue treating patients, and rely on protected status if American forces arrived. But Müller also understood that protected status meant nothing if Americans didn't realize the facility was a hospital, or if combat occurred around the hospital before its status could be communicated. He made the decision to remain in place but prepare for possible evacuation. Non-critical patients who could walk were given the option of attempting to reach German lines on their own. About 30 men chose this option and departed. The remaining patients and all medical staff would stay. Müller had Red Cross flags placed prominently around the facility and positioned medics at all approaches to identify the hospital to any forces that might arrive. On August 17th, American tanks entered Sens. Müller stood in the hospital courtyard with a white flag and a Red Cross banner, waiting as Shermans rolled down the street toward his facility. An American officer dismounted and approached cautiously. Müller identified himself in broken English, explained this was a medical facility, and requested the wounded be treated according to international convention. The American officer, a captain, inspected the hospital and confirmed its status. He posted guards and informed Müller that American forces had been operating in this area for 2 days. Sens was now behind American lines. The hospital staff and patients were prisoners of war, but they would be allowed to continue treating the wounded under American supervision. Medical supplies would be provided from American stocks. The captain seemed almost apologetic, explaining that his unit's rapid advance meant they often encountered German installations that didn't know Americans were in the area. Hauptmann Kurt Weiss commanded a blocking detachment tasked with defending a bridge crossing over a minor river near the town of Joigny. His unit, roughly company strength, was composed of stragglers from various formations that had been reorganized into provisional combat unit. The men were tired, many wounded, equipment was limited, but they had clear mission: hold the bridge and delay American pursuit to allow other German forces time to withdraw. Weiss established defensive positions around the bridge on August 17th. His orders stated that American forces were advancing from the west and would likely attempt to seize the bridge intact. He positioned his strongest elements to cover the western approaches. Anti-tank weapons were sighted to engage enemy armor coming from expected direction. He felt reasonably confident his position could hold for the required time, perhaps a day, maybe two if they were fortunate. On the morning of August 18th, Weiss received no communication from higher command. This wasn't unusual. Communications in retreat were always difficult. He assumed his orders remained valid and maintained his defensive posture. His men had slept in shifts, eaten cold rations, and prepared as well as possible for the coming fight. Morale was low, but discipline was intact. These were soldiers who understood their duty. Around midday, one of Weiss's outposts reported vehicle sounds coming from the east. This made no sense. East was where German forces should be, where his unit's line of withdrawal was supposed to go. Weiss assumed the outpost was confused, perhaps hearing German vehicles on roads behind their position. He ordered the outpost to investigate and report clearly. The outpost reported again 15 minutes later. American tanks approaching from the east. Multiple vehicles, moving toward the bridge from the wrong direction. Weiss refused to believe it initially. American forces couldn't be east of his position. That would mean they had encircled his blocking detachment, that they were between him and German lines. The entire premise of his mission, holding a bridge to delay westward advancing Americans, would be meaningless if Americans had already passed this point. Weiss climbed to an observation position and looked east with binoculars. The outpost was correct. American Shermans, at least a platoon, possibly more, were advancing toward the bridge from the east. They weren't encountering any resistance. They were moving freely through what should have been German-controlled territory. Weiss's carefully prepared defensive position faced the wrong direction. He ordered his unit to redeploy rapidly, shifting forces to defend against the eastern approach. But his positions had been prepared for defense to the west. Trenches, wire obstacles, fighting positions, all oriented toward threat from that direction. Reorienting the defense required time his unit didn't have. The American tanks were already within engagement range. Weiss's anti-tank gun crew attempted to engage the lead Sherman. They fired one round that missed, giving away their position. American tank return fire destroyed the gun and killed its crew. The other American tanks began systematic suppression of Weiss's positions, firing into areas where German troops were visible or suspected. Weiss's men returned fire with rifles and machine guns, but small arms were ineffective against armored vehicles. The engagement lasted perhaps 20 minutes. When it ended, Weiss had lost a third of his men killed or seriously wounded. His unit's cohesion was shattered. Men were abandoning positions and retreating north along the river, away from both the western and eastern threats. Weiss tried to maintain control, but the situation had deteriorated beyond his ability to command effectively. He gathered the survivors he could reach, perhaps 30 men from the company he had commanded that morning. They moved north through forest, trying to avoid roads where American forces were clearly operating. None of the men understood what had happened. They had been positioned to block an advance, but the advance had already passed them. Their mission had been irrelevant before it began, and nobody had known. By August 20th, the panic that had begun in isolated incidents across eastern France had spread to become general phenomenon affecting all German rear area forces. Soldiers who had believed they were safely behind the front discovered that the front no longer existed as meaningful concept. American forces weren't contained by any line. They were operating across hundreds of square kilometers, appearing wherever German defenses were weakest or absent. The psychological impact on rear area troops was devastating and immediate. These were men who had never expected to face combat directly. Security guards, supply clerks, logistics personnel, administrative staff, hospital workers. They had joined or been assigned to rear area duties specifically because they weren't frontline soldiers. Many were older or medically limited, or simply not suited for combat. Now suddenly they found themselves in combat zones they hadn't known existed, facing enemy forces they hadn't been prepared to fight. The panic manifested in various forms. Some units simply dissolved, with men abandoning equipment and positions to flee east as individuals or small groups. Others attempted to maintain military discipline while withdrawing, but without orders or clear destination, these organized retreats quickly became confused and disorganized. Equipment was abandoned not because it was damaged, but because units couldn't move it fast enough or didn't know where to take it. Communication breakdown amplified the panic. Units couldn't contact higher headquarters for orders. Higher headquarters couldn't reach subordinate units to provide guidance. The command structure that was supposed to coordinate military operations had fractured. Individual commanders made their own decisions based on incomplete information and personal judgment. Some decided to fight. Others chose to surrender. Most simply tried to escape, hoping to reach German lines whose location they couldn't determine. The roads east became clogged with retreating German forces. Supply trucks, staff cars, ambulances, columns of soldiers marching on foot, all moving in same direction, all trying to outrun American pursuit they couldn't see but knew was behind them. American aircraft attacked these columns mercilessly. Fighter bombers strafed the crowded roads. The retreating Germans had minimal anti-aircraft capability and no air cover. Casualties mounted not from ground combat, but from air attack against troops packed on roads with nowhere to hide. German prisoners captured during this period told American interrogators remarkably consistent stories. They described the shock of discovering American forces in areas they had believed safe, the confusion when orders stopped coming, or when orders they received no longer matched tactical reality, the fear that came from not knowing where the enemy was or where friendly forces were located, the humiliation of being defeated not through combat but through being outmaneuvered and bypassed before they even understood what was happening. The panic wasn't universal. Some German units maintained discipline and fought effective rearguard actions. Some commanders kept their men together and conducted organized withdrawals. But these were exceptions. The general pattern across the rear areas was dissolution of military cohesion, collapse of command authority, and transformation of organized military forces into streams of refugees in uniform, all trying desperately to escape an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. What made the panic particularly corrosive was the loss of faith in the command system. Rear area soldiers had trusted that higher headquarters understood the situation and would keep them informed of danger. They had believed that if the front collapsed, they would receive warning and orders for withdrawal. These assumptions had proven completely false. The command system had lost awareness of its own situation faster than the situation actually deteriorated. Orders, when they came at all, addressed circumstances that no longer existed. The system these men had relied on for direction and protection had failed them completely. By late August, the organized German military presence in central France had effectively ceased to exist. Some units had fought their way back to German lines. Others had been destroyed or captured. Many had simply dissolved, their personnel scattered across the countryside, trying individually to reach safety. The rear areas that had once been considered safe zones, where thousands of support troops carried out the unglamorous but essential work of sustaining armies in the field, had become a hunting ground where American armor roamed freely, and German soldiers died or surrendered by the thousands, many of them having never fired a shot in their own defense because they hadn't known they were in danger until it was already too late to matter.